Hey, what you're about to hear is the first episode of the third season of Temple of the Falls Pod. Over the next 10 weeks, we'll be releasing new episodes, some with familiar flavors and some with new panache. We'll be trying some new things, including releasing our episodes on YouTube. So if that's your preferred platform, go check it out. Subscribe, thumbs up, share. Actually, sharing would be super helpful for us. If you like our chats, let a friend know. You'll be better friends for it. And we'd be super stoked. Anyway, I'll be checking in throughout the season, filling you in on different things. So I'll see you next time. Enjoy the episode. Hello, and welcome to Temple of the Falls Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. Welcome to Season 3.
Hey!
How exciting. We are 20 episodes in. This is our 21st episode. Old enough to drink. And with Season 3, we've got so much exciting stuff for you going on. Some old bits, some old favorites, some new topics. We'll see all of them in the next 10 weeks.
We got some new treasures. I'm real excited about some new treasures.
Oh, heck.
New treasures. New temples treasures.
Mm-hmm.
Got some new decks coming.
Got some new decks. Got some old decks. Got some themey decks. But today, let's talk about today. Today we're gonna talk about Spelltable. I forgot what it was called. We're gonna talk about Spelltable and how much of a boon it is for the Magic community over the past year plus. It has brought so many people together in, for example, our weekly group uses it every weekly. And I think it would be, we would have a very different feeling towards Magic if we didn't have this consistent thing going.
Right. I mean, we did Tabletop Simulator for a long time. And for a while, we were going back and forth because there are things that the simulator does offer that you don't get on Spelltable. Like, you can play any deck you want on the Tabletop Simulator. So you get a chance to play test decks that you were working on. You get a chance to try out the precons without ever having bought them. You can try out other people's decks without ever buying the cards. So there's a certain benefit there that it really opens up the options for you as far as what you're playing. However, I like Spelltable. I like that.
I like holding my cards.
It's the tactile feel. And that was something that I really struggled with as we went through the pandemic, was just, you don't get the direct interaction, but at least you can get that tactile feel that you get with Spelltable, or, prior to Spelltable, on Zoom with your friends and just telling each other what the cards were and what your life total was and everything. So, thank goodness Spelltable came along. So
yeah, it's been amazing. And I think even with some restrictions loosening and everyone starting to get the vaccinations, we're going to start playing more in person, but I don't think we're ever going to fully leave Spelltable behind. I think it's either you or I, or just Magic in general, is not going to leave Spelltable behind. It's brought thousands of miles of connection to the world.
I mean, there are a lot of, and I know this because, I wrote for long enough and was emailed this repeatedly. There are a lot of people out there. I would write about my play group and how we played every week, and how this was our standard setup, and et cetera, And I would consistently hear from people who said that they just don't have that play group. And Spelltable opens up a whole different community. You can log into Spelltable and play games with other people who are just looking for games. You know, if your play group is scattered across a geographic area that's just way too big for everybody to be meeting up at somebody's house, even when we are able to safely, it may just prove to be a just straight up distance that keeps people apart. And Spelltable does, Spelltable manages that. I mean, we're seeing that in our group.
We've got people who've moved out of the city, out of convenience, out of pricing, out of whatever, that we still want to keep in contact with, that we still want to play Magic with. Because of the distance, it just makes it harder to play in person. So Spelltable's there to make sure that our group doesn't just become you and me.
Right. Something that Andy and I have been sort of talking about these last few months and kind of realizing as we've been getting more and more games under our belt with Spelltable is there are very definitely some limitations to Spelltable. And so we sort of wanted to go through some of the decks. And I'm going to say right up front, again, don't treat this as a reason to never play those decks.
Right.
This is meant to be a warning, just a reminder that this can be a little more tricky. That you're going to want to, really be careful. Exactly. You really want to be prepared for these sorts of things when you're playing with these decks. And honestly, if you're not, it just makes the gameplay that much more difficult to follow for your friends. Look, nobody wants to win the game because your opponent didn't recognize that you had a card on the battlefield, or that you have some interaction, or there's something about your deck.
Winning, Bruce.
Yeah. Or that your opponent has, or there's some interaction going on with your deck that's very difficult for your opponent to glean, simply by virtue of being on video. So we thought we would take the opportunity to go through some of these, just mostly as a reminder to just to be aware. And no, I'm not going to just sit here and bemoan the fact that I can't play Buzzbark. I'm just,
Let's get it out of the way. Buzzbark. Buzzbark's the first thing we're going to talk about. Buzzbark, you want to roll dice, right?
Right. But, honestly, the way I play Buzzbark, you can do it by video. I have. But it's far less fun when your opponents only get to see a pile of cards brought right up next to the camera, and then nothing, and then all of a sudden it focuses back in, and they see where dice have landed. It's just not nearly as satisfying for them or you to do this. And it does take away half of Buzzbark's ability in that there will never be an opportunity when, instead of dropping it on Buzzbark and the creatures surrounding him, that I could then drop it on an opponent's creature and try to kill it. That's just not even an option over Spelltable. So, all right, so Andy, we spent enough time talking about a single card and the unsets. Let's get into a few of the topics, or a few of the variations that we had talked about earlier.
It was interesting. Thinking about this topic, I came across this nebulous idea, this almost cycle, where each color has a different way to make it difficult to play Magic over Spelltable.
Right.
So, let's kind of go through them.
Sure.
black, you think of things like Gonti, Lord of Luxury, where take things off the top of your opponent's graveyards. That mechanic, that type of mechanic, was very heavily seen in black years ago, and is now starting to be more red heavy. Things like Robber of the Rich, etc. And obviously that's going to be difficult to do if you're trying to hold any information away from your opponents. They're going to have to flip over their own deck, and you're going to trust that they didn't look. Or even just remembering that you have access to that card, even though you don't physically have it on your board.
Right. And we've seen that not just with that, flip the top card thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that essentially runs through a lot of different abilities.
Yeah.
Essentially, as soon as you get access to your opponent's cards in some way, it becomes just that little bit more difficult to move it, to follow along.
Exactly. I mean, we've got control magic in its basic form, and then we also have things like Lazav, where you're making your creature a copy of a creature that you can't physically touch,
right?
Or mimic that, etc.
Yeah. As someone who actually, I played Mimic That in our Spelltable game just last week.
Mm-hmm.
And keeping track of what went to the graveyard and, not being able to just, sort of lean over the table and get a quick glance down somebody's list of graveyard cards is a pain.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And then
because then you gotta
tracking what goes to the graveyard and what gets exiled. And if you want it, then your opponent then has to figure out a way to set it to the side and keep track of the fact that it's under a Mimic That. So even the most prepared person is now being asked to do something that their deck just doesn't do. So you have to be, so there has to be a certain amount of flexibility and understanding with how that gets set up. And then you understand that that's under the Mimic Vat. The easiest thing with the Mimic Vat is that you simply tap it and make a copy of the card that you can now see underneath it, but that card is now never there.
Right.
So.
I had the same issue with my Mimeoplasm deck, and
right.
I'm sure you have with your Griselda deck.
Oh, yeah.
Where you're taking things out of the graveyard, which, I mean, you're trying to be somewhat sneaky about it by, seeing what's in other people's graveyards, but to do that over webcam, you kind of have to be like, Bruce, can I... What's in your graveyard?
Can you tell me what's in your graveyard?
Right.
Because you can't even hold your graveyard up to the camera and scroll through it one card at a time. That's just ridiculous. Right. Griselda...
And obviously make it easier. Just be like, hey, what are the creatures in your graveyard?
Right.
And it's obvious what you're doing at that point.
Yes. Well, and with Griselda, a lot of opponents, especially opponents who are not used to playing against some of these cards, don't realize what the card can do. So if you don't realize that Griselda can take cards out of your graveyard, you're less likely to make efforts to keep them out of your graveyard. So that Sun Titan might be sitting there, and if you are fully aware of what Griselda can do, then you're more likely to try and get it back out of the graveyard as fast as possible. If you don't know, then you're like, okay, well, it can sit there for a while. I'll get to it.
Yeah.
So and as soon as I say, what cards are in your graveyard? What creature cards are in your graveyard? Even if you're not asking, you just look at the board and be like, oh, that's right. I got to deal with that. or I have to figure something out. And it doesn't take long until all of your opponents are also looking at your, every time you ask a question, think about Rhystic Study, think about Smothering Tithe. And now every time you ask a question about their graveyard, you're going to be doing, you are essentially queuing up all of the same things. It's, you know, Smothering Tithe and Rhystic Study are just there to remind you every single time that person gets a treasure or draws a card. And Griselda, you are just reminding them over and over again, yes, I have this thread out. Yes, and you're constantly reminding them every time you ask. So it requires you to be super vigilant, which, you know, I am not. So quite often I have to ask, or I just decide I'm not going to ask, and I'm just going to use whatever cards are in my graveyard to make it work. And I should mention that, you know, I've been talking about Griselda. If you are discarding what I'm saying just because she's silver bordered, then, you know, replace the words Griselda with the Mimeoplasm.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
The Mimeoplasm is doing the exact same thing. It's just you're getting a slightly different result. But it does the same thing. You're looking for 2 creatures in graveyards, and then you're going to take them out of the graveyards. So this isn't another one of those, oh, this is just silver bordered silliness. It's not. This applies for whether or not your group or the people you're playing with are playing silver bordered or not. So
yeah, and with things like Rhystic Study, and I mean I've had this happen a couple times where like my opponent has a fog bank, so I like without thinking just attack them because I forgot, because the cards are tiny and sometimes your connection isn't strong enough or their connection isn't strong enough, so the card reader doesn't pick it up, so it's just, you know, you got the spinny wheel in the corner, and unless you took notes you don't know fully what they have, but you're like, I'm going to attack them because they need to go down.
Just a quick note, for those of you who haven't used Spelltable, imagine it as an overlay for Zoom or whatever online video conferencing software you've got. But one of the things that Spelltable offers is that you can put your mouse over one of the cards on the table, click it, and most of the time it will then show you the card in a bigger, higher definition format. So you can then read all the cards, and it has a list of them down the side so that you can refer to them again and again. And that's great, but as Andy said, there are times when you look at the table, you're not looking at the cards down the right side. You're looking at the table, and maybe that fog bank's a little blurry, and you're like, yeah, I remember what it is. I remember that's a creature. Okay, so I'm going to do this, this, and this, but you forget what the creature actually does.
Yeah.
If it does anything in combat. And that's easy. That's really easy to do.
Yeah, and there's like kind of generally a lot of visual shorthand or verbal shorthand that kind of gets glossed over because whether your connection's not great enough that you can click on the cards, or somebody's just like, all right, something I got salty about last week was Crush Contraband. I thought it just destroyed. But it exiles things. And so if somebody's like, I Crush Contraband that, and I'm like, okay, and it just goes to my graveyard. And then they play it again later, and it's like, oh no, it exiles. And I was like, if we were in person, that person would have seen me put it in my graveyard rather than my exile zone, etc., etc. And like, it just would have been more easy. And the thing is like, this isn't a thing that would make, like, these aren't things that can make Spelltable better. These are just things that are just inherent issues with overall Webcam Commander.
Yeah.
So like, if somebody starts to attack you, being like, hey, I've got this and this, or whatever, giving them the chance, being a little lenient with those kinds of things tend to help
right. And playing
everyone.
And playing on Spelltable, like that fog bank issue, it never should have been an issue.
Right.
It should. Everybody has to play a little more generously. So,
and that's not even to say that player did anything wrong. We were late in the game, and it was definitely like, duh. Like, I knew that person had a fog bank.
Yeah, at that point, you should have known. They shouldn't need to remind you. And if you're swinging in, as far as they're concerned, it means you probably have something that's going to mess with the fog bank. Like, the first time you swing in, you go to swing at me, I should be like, by the way, here in my land, I have a maze of if. It will stuff your creature. So just keep that in mind. Now, maybe that's not the ideal way to play Maze of If. Maybe you should, you want your opponent to actually look at your cards, and if they walk into this, they walk into it. But because of the difficulties that come along with playing on video, let them know that you've got it. I mean, even if it's just a matter of putting your hand on the card and giving it a little shake on the table, it's your little reminder. It's here. Right. You don't necessarily even have to say anything. Just a cue to sort of to set them out there.
Yeah. It really solidifies the reasons for playing the game for more than just winning. Obviously, I think everyone's done it, played into the thing that is so evidently clear on the board, then they just end up getting super salty because like of course it's there, and it like I said, it plays into the idea of where we want to do big spectacular things, or we want to hang out with our friends, and we don't want to just be shut down at every corner, even if it's super obvious.
Right.
We're going to quickly take a break. We're going to head to commercial. We'll be right back with some more, I guess issues with webcam in general, and some neat tips to counteract those issues. So we'll be right back. This episode of Temple of the False Spot is brought to you by Oblivion Ring. For just 2 generic and a white mana, exile a non-land permanent under the Oblivion Ring until it leaves. What value? But wait, you can't because you're playing over webcams? Well, this is awkward. Bruce?
Andy, back to you.
Welcome back, everyone. I feel refreshed. How about you, Bruce?
Delightful.
Hell yeah.
I'm just a delight today.
Don't know if that was sarcastic, but I hope not. Sorry. Kind of going back to what we were talking about. There's just these ways that playing webcam Magic, whether it's Commander or not, become difficult solely from the barrier, the physical barrier of the screen.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the difficulties that we've talked about up to this point have just been a matter of I cannot give you the card. Whether you are trying to take it out of my graveyard, out of the battlefield, wherever, we've all developed this shorthand where we simply hold the card, or put it in a particular spot where it makes sense. A Mimic Vat, an Oblivion Ring. If the cards are removed with the mimeoplasm, usually you'll keep the one card where you're keeping the text under that card. So it's easy to keep track of what the card does. And in all of these scenarios, it's all made just a little bit harder. Not impossible, not by any stretch, but it's just a little harder, a little bit more awkward. And it's, it is something that you do want to keep in mind when you're, when you're choosing what decks to play. Because repeated instances of a lot of these effects, once they start becoming cumulative, I mean, yes, you're not going to have 4 O-rings in your deck, but if you have multiple ways to exile cards and that those cards could come back, you now need to be able to keep track of whatever card is under each of them, and your opponents also need to know which card is under what. So it becomes just that little bit more tricky, a little bit more awkward. So
yeah, and I think like it kind of comes to, for lack of a better term, an apex with the first set released under the pandemic, Ikoria, where Mutate was introduced, because you've got all of these cards together. So for those who don't know, Mutate says, if you cast this spell for its Mutate cost, put it over or under target non-human creature you own. They mutate into the creature on top plus all abilities from under it. So essentially it's whatever you see on top, and then usually people fan it underneath so that it's,
right. I mean, for those who haven't played with a lot of Mutate, it tends to get treated like auras or equipment, where you slide, usually it's the image, the picture, underneath the other card, and then you've got this longer version of the card. Well, that's exactly what Mutate does, except Mutate will happen, repeatedly. So you'll get more than one card going underneath, so pretty soon you've got 2 or 3 cards.
And obviously that becomes difficult with things like the card recognizer. What's it called? Card recognizer. Sure.
Yeah. Spelltable recognizes cards because it looks at the image on the card.
Right.
And finds the card. So you can click on that mutated creature all you want, but all it's ever going to find is the top card. So you really have to keep track of what each card does. So, if you want to maximize, that gets really difficult, because then you have to say to the person who has the mutated creature, what exactly does this thing do? How big is it? And then they go through and they tell you everything that it has and does and everything else. And then you now decide whether or not you're going to swing that way. Well, you are reminding them exactly, that you think they're a threat. And when they tell you what the deal is, you're now saying to them, well, I think you're the threat, but I can't do anything about it because that thing's too big. So there's all sorts of restrictions that come along with that. And I know Mutate's a little bit different in that, you're not taking somebody else's card. So,
right.
But you are stacking it up to make it more difficult. So,
yeah, it's unfortunate timing on Wizards' part for this specific mechanic. And I think, honestly, whatever mechanic was going to come out of the first set in the pandemic probably would have been... No, this was worst case scenario.
Yeah.
The flavor of Ikoria were these new monsters, and with that you've got these weird names like Vadrock, Apex of Thunder. How do you spell that? Like even trying to look it up without bringing the whole game to a halt and being like, how do you spell that? Makes it difficult, especially where they also had the Godzilla arts for most of the mutating.
Right. So so you've got new cards, right, different pictures, and
different names,
and then you're stuffing most of the identifiers underneath another card.
Right.
I want people to be able to play the new cards, and quite honestly, our game last week, our friend who played this Mutate deck, I mean, that deck was a blast. It
was amazing.
It was so much fun watching them pull out, weird, different, mutated creatures throughout the course of the game. The trick was, I need you to tell me every single card that's there, so I can punch it up on Spelltable, so that I can refer to it on Spelltable over and over and over again, because I'm not remembering these new creatures.
Yeah, especially with a lot of mutate creatures, it has, whenever this mutates, do X, Y, or Z. So you've got lines and lines of text that just become. I mean, all of this to say, it creates a muddled board.
Yeah.
Whether you have things covered up, or lots of lines of text on a small card, or poor connection, or whatever, it becomes visually overwhelming on the screen.
Right.
Even if you have it on single mode, where you see just one play mat, and kind of along the same lines, I had written down Brutaclad, because you're going to be creating a lot of tokens. Obviously not just Brutaclad, but any token generator, you're going to have a lot of tokens, whether they're tokens that actually exist, or tokens that are, your Brutaclad deck specifically wants to create very unique tokens that have never existed, so that you can copy them and copy them and copy them. With that, a lot of token strategies is to go wide, and that also creates a muddled experience, because it's just so densely packed.
Right, and quite honestly, that's what I want.
Yeah.
I want to see my playmat covered in all these weird, funky tokens, and then all of a sudden, oh, right, remember those 10 treasures I just created? Yeah, now they are all copies of your mutated creature. And there's that many of them, because that's really what I'm looking for. But yes, does it create a muddled board? Oh, you better believe it, because that is just, it's a mess, and you're constantly trying to keep track of what they are now. I think that's also part of the reason why Brutaclad says that all of the tokens have to change. One other one that I want to touch on before we start talking about some of the ways to make these difficult scenarios a little easier. I want to talk about hand size. We talked not too long ago about threat assessment, and we made it clear that hand size is one of the biggest things you should be considering when doing threat assessment, because the person with one card or no cards in hand, definitely their threat is what they've got on the board, whereas the person who's got 6 cards in hand, 7 cards in hand, more, most likely has something in hand that they can play in response to whatever you're doing. It might not be a counterspell, but it might be something else that can muck up the board at least a little bit. Spelltable and other video options, they don't show hand size. You don't get to see how many cards are in hand unless you ask. And then you have to ask. And that's all right when you've got something on the board that, if I have a creature and it's an XX creature and it gets where X is the number of cards in all of my opponent's hands, well, then me asking, it becomes obvious as to why I'm asking. But if I'm holding cards in hand and I'm asking you, how many cards do you have in hand? Well,
like Windfall.
Right. Then it could be a windfall. It could just be me fishing to find out, what is the likelihood that you have something. Suddenly you're becoming aware that, okay, time to queue up. Something's coming. Because nobody asks this all the time, and to do it all the time just as a way to make it difficult for your opponents to properly assess whether or not this is a threat or not, is just gumming up the works in the game so badly that
especially,
it's going to mess it up.
Yeah, especially where on playing over webcam, you have one channel of voice.
Yes.
You each talk over each other, and now you can't hear anything. While in person, you can whisper to the person next to you, and the person across the table won't hear you. Or having everything at the same level makes it very difficult to, side talk or crosstalk or
right.
whatever. And doing small actions like asking how many cards in hand everyone has, it just makes it very apparent of your intent, whether you wanted it to be extremely apparent or not.
Yeah, but hand size is definitely something that you don't see, and something to be aware of. It's definitely one of the limitations that come with Spelltable. So as long as you keep your games casual, it shouldn't be that big an issue. But but it is something to keep in mind. And I know that every time anybody in our group asks, we know something's coming. So so there's that. So how to minimize some of these issues? I'm going to go with what I think is one of the biggest ones, one of the easiest ways to do this. I think if you are planning to play Spelltable more than 2 times, I think you should have access to this. Dry erase markers and erasable cards. You can choose to do this with blank cards as well, but I really like the dry erase markers for this. You can buy packs, essentially packs of 50 blank cards, and if you use a dry erase marker on them, they wipe right off. I don't remember the brand name. I trust all of you can Google this and figure out what you should have. I have been using these now since well before the pandemic started, and it became clear to me that with Spelltable, these are virtually essential. I got them, I think it was just before I started playing Bruteclad, and that was part of it, because Bruteclad makes these funky tokens of other creatures that don't have a token version. If I need a 3/3 lizard, Wizards makes one. I can go out and buy them. But Wizards doesn't make a token of, I don't know, a
Wormcoil engine.
Right. Doesn't make a token of the actual Wormcoil engine. You can get tokens of of what it makes when it dies, but you can't get a token of Wormcoil engine. So I just make one. And you can choose to be as fancy as you want with the art or not. You can be as talented or less talented as you want, as long as it is clear to you and your opponents what this card is, you're good to go. I like them because, or not only can you show which of your creatures are token creatures, you can also show which are, show your treasures. You can show, you can show what card is under Mimic That, if you control the Mimic That. If your opponent has lost their card to the Mimic That, they can just write under Mimic That on one of these and put it on top of that creature. So it doesn't matter. If there's 2 copies of Mimic That, they can still figure out which is under which. It gives you so many shorthand options that really work. If I have a card to the effect that everybody gets an extra 2 mana on their main phase, or on your upkeep you get to draw an extra card. Well, I can write that on a card, and it's sitting on the table at all times. Don't forget to draw the extra, or don't forget to take a point of damage if you tap. Just something there that is very visible and very obvious. And they work so well for this, and they do mitigate a lot of the difficulties. Now, and it's definitely something I encourage everybody to go out and get a package of this stuff. And no, we are not sponsored by these guys. So
we have no affiliation with Infinitokens or any
other company that makes these erasable
dry
cards.
erase.
Yeah. But even if your deck never creates a token, somebody else's deck is likely to mess with your board state in some way, and you'll want these tokens there as a shorthand to just immediately remind you, why is that card in my command zone? Oh, that's right, it's not in my command zone. It's just sitting over there because Susan has control of that creature right now, or whatever. It just makes a shorthander for you.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing behind that, because I use regular blank playing cards with Sharpies, because I think it's kind of cool to have this stack of garbage tokens that I can be like, oh yeah, remember when I did that? And they're cheap. They're not as recycle friendly as the erasable ones, but I think the biggest idea behind it is keeping the board state as concise and visible as possible.
Yes.
But also the idea of just being ready for the game.
Right.
Having these by your side, being ready for whatever the game throws at you.
Some of the other things that you can do to improve things, make it very clear what you're casting when you cast it. And I know that this is something that we should be doing in every game, but when you're face to face, you can kind of make up for it. When you're on video, sometimes your screen isn't quite good enough. Your camera quality is not as high res as you would hope it would be.
Your camera quality, your internet connection, your lighting.
Yes.
So much glare.
There's a ton of glare. So when you play the card, announce it. Make sure you announce the name of the card very clearly, because odds are at least one other person on that table has got Scryfall open, and they're about to punch in whatever that card is, because maybe Spelltable isn't working. The Spelltable
card identifier
is not working properly for them. So they've got Scryfall open and they're about to punch in the card. So make sure you make it clear what you're casting, or how you're activating, or why you're tapping the creature.
I'd say even go beyond that and read the card fully. Sometimes I have a notebook next to me just so that in case I can't click on the cards, I write down quickly what they are or what they do, more so how they affect my board, what I should be looking out for.
So Andy, the last point that I wanted to throw in, keeping in mind Spelltable, you really want to examine the board state and be ready to play when it's your turn to play. Online games are already limited because it's hard. When you're sitting around the kitchen table, everyone can chat and talk. When you're playing online on Spelltable, it's a lot harder to have that kind of chat, because then you can't hear what the person is saying as far as what cards they're playing or who they're attacking. So the interaction on Spelltable gets significantly reduced from what it would be in person. So if you haven't paid attention to what's going on during the round, and then on your turn you're now examining the board and trying to figure out what you should do, it used to be that if you were going to drag your butt, at least they could chat, and now they can't even do that. So now they're all sitting there watching you think, about, what you should do. And they don't even get to see you on the camera. They're just staring at your board state. And they're probably not seeing anything because you're looking at your cards, you're looking at the table, you're looking at this, but they can't see any of that. All they can see is that nothing is happening. Plan your turn.
Yeah.
Plan your turn. I say this as somebody who is terrible with this. You have to keep the game moving. You have to be ready to go when it's your turn. Make sure you know exactly what your plans are, and maybe your draw step changes your plans a little bit, but be ready, make your move, and complete your turn and pass it on, and make sure you are clear that you are passing on the turn. Spelltable does have a wonderful little setup where if you choose to use it, where you can click the space bar and it will feature the next person in line, so that person will know that you've passed the turn.
Oh yeah, it's great.
It is great.
Yeah. The nice thing too with Spelltable and that feature is that as you pass the turn, it resets the timer. So you will see how long you've been taking your turn.
Yes, you will.
Which is just a great way to let somebody know how long, to kind of guilt them into being a little more on the ball.
Right.
I think it really is a good. I think Spelltable of all things has emphasized the things that we talked about in our episode of what to do when it's not your turn. And I think when it is your turn, I know something that I just physically find difficult. As somebody with ADHD, I find it extremely difficult to focus on what I'm trying to do when other people are talking. Not necessarily in person, but definitely when I have headphones in and they're speaking directly into my ear. And it's not even to me or about me. They're just trying to enjoy the evening. And I'm like, so having the turn planned out gives everybody a bit of time to relax a little. Have the gathering part of Magic, and really embrace the things that we're here together to do. But yeah, I think the number one thing, whether it's turn by turn basis or as the game overall, the number one thing to do when going into a game of Webcam Commander is to just be prepared. Tacky and cheesy as that is, I think whether it's you've got your blank tokens or you've got your regular tokens or you've got your webcam positioned correctly, or you're like, oh no, I've never done this before, go in, try it out. It's a free service. You can go in to your own room, make sure everything's working correctly before you jump into a game. Just be ready, but most importantly, just kind of have fun. I think that it has been a lifesaver over the past 14 months, almost 15 months, that we've been in this situation, that I honestly don't know if I would have continued a pursuit of playing Magic if it weren't for things like Spelltable.
Right.
So Spelltable, it's great stuff. Infinite tokens and other erasable tokens, good stuff. Writing things down in a notebook, good stuff. Check it all out. I think that's going to do it for us tonight.
I think so.
Cool. We're so excited to share season 3 with you guys. We got an action-packed season full of fun goodies and surprises. So make sure you keep hanging out, share it with your friends. Thanks for listening. We're Temple of the False Pod. Where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
Have a great night, and may your 5th land be the Temple.
Bye.
Hey everyone, Andy here. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Temple of the False Pod. Just a few housekeeping things here at the end of the show. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, pretty much wherever you can find podcasts. Subscribe and give us a review. It really helps out the show. And it'll show us what you like about our podcast. Also, we've got a Twitter and an Instagram. Our handle is FalsePodMTG, all one word. So be sure to follow us. Feel free to reach out to us there or drop us an email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com and tell us your favorite magic-related story. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again to you and to Bruce. He's Mana Burned on Twitter, and I'm Andy Weekend on Twitter and Twitch. We're Temple of the False Pod, where our decks aren't optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. Have a great night, and may your fifth land be the temple.